Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, anger over water charges in Ireland has reached a boiling point. Thousands of people are upset and they say they can't afford to pay. Our digital producer is Omar Badar this week because Malika Balai is off. When Omar came to work, he was showered with comments from the community. He could barely say hello to me. There was so much response.
It really is overwhelming.
How did you wrangle it together?
It's kind of like something like I've never seen before.
All
Try
right,
to get through as much of it as possible.
Right.
You know, the community, there's certainly diversity of thoughts on this, but
Sure.
it certainly leans more in favor of people who are opposed to this new charge.
Interesting.
We actually asked the community what they thought of a possible new charge, and people who are frustrated by it certainly still had their sense of humor while talking about it. You have anti-government Scare here tweeted in saying, "You mean, what do we think about the second water charge? Sure, it's a great idea. We're Irish, then sure," and then he uses the hashtag Irish water must go. And then we have Copito here who also tweeted in saying, "Absolutely. Maybe the next step could be every citizen with a meter around their neck to measure how much they're breathing." So that gives you a sense of some of the frustration we're seeing.
Definitely.
For those of you at home, you can still tweet us using the hashtag AJStream, and we'll try to get to those tweets during the show. And here's a look at some of the other stories that we're following.
Protesters are flooding the streets in Ireland, angry over a water charge proposal, and that's because until now, water has been free. The government says the charges are part of the EU bailout deal, but news of the decision has increased anxieties about growing class divisions because many say they can't afford these charges.
Do you hear this man instructing this digger driver to drive through people?
My hands are here. You're coming within my space.
No.
Please get out of my space.
You're in our space.
All right.
Relax. You're in our space.
So what you saw there were opponents of the measure blocking workers from installing meters, and that's been happening in many working class areas. So how can Ireland deal with its water crisis? To help us talk about this, in Dublin we have Michelle Mulherin. She is a Fine Gael politician for County Mayo. Dáithí Doolan is Dublin City Council member. In Clough Jordan we have Peter Kirby, Professor Emeritus at the University of Limerick. And in Letterkenny, Andrew Galvin is a poet and a performance artist. Good to have you here, everybody. Dáithí, let me start with you. I was surprised at how bad Ireland's water system was. You're a very modern country with a lot of great facilities right there in Ireland. What's happened to your water system? Why is it not in good nick?
Well, first of all, I have to correct you on what you said at the start. Our water isn't for free. We pay for it in our taxes. Our general taxation goes towards all essential services, healthcare, housing, education and water. We pay for every drop of water we drink. In every paycheck we pay tax. Every item we buy we pay tax, and a section of that taxation is taken by the government quite rightly and used for our essential service of water. But what's happened is over the years it hasn't received the proper investment that's needed, and in fact shockingly 46% of all water leaks out before I even turn on my tap. So in order to improve that, it needs public investment, public funding paid for through the Exchequer. And if we do need to reform the tax system to get more money in, let's do that. Let's have that debate about taxation funding a water system. Indeed, you're right, the water system isn't up to scratch. It's not a 21st century water system, but this government are approaching it, like the previous number of governments, the wrong way. They're trying to impose a charge on households who already pay for their tax. And if I can use maybe the analogy, if you went out and bought a sofa or a settee for your home, you came home, you paid for it, and then the shop owner comes along to you and starts renting it to you. Of course you'd oppose it because it's wrong. You can't pay for something twice. So what we're saying is that the money that's been pumped in, nearly €1 billion has been pumped into Irish water, not a drop of water has even come through our taps yet. So what we're saying is the money that's going into Irish water will be far better invested in the domestic water system, brought up to a 21st century standard to ensure that we have water drinkable, accessible to people who need it. And indeed we need it for further economic development as well. But this government approached it the wrong way, and the problem is it's now part of its policy of austerity. We've had six budgets of austerity that's heaped pain and cost upon the shoulders of low and middle income families, and now they've been asked to swallow another charge on top of our property tax, on top of every other charge. And of course we all know that these charges will affect the low income families far more than the elite, the rich and the millionaires. And that's wrong, it's unacceptable, and we'll continue to oppose it.
So Professor, what Dahi just said, does that make sense? Do you understand why people are out protesting? Because they feel they've already paid for their water through tax, so why should they be metered as well?
Well, I think that Andrew, in making his comment at the beginning of the programme, put his finger on it. These protests are about austerity, and I completely agree and support them. They're long overdue. The problem is that they've chosen the wrong issue. And where I disagree with Dahi, I agree with a lot of what Dahi says, is that, he's effectively saying we go back to the old system which has failed without telling us how we're going to address the huge failures in that system. He doesn't show how we're going to put in place a series of incentives that might get people to save their use of water, because we're very wasteful in our use of water. And the old system gave the responsibility to our local authorities to manage the water system. And is he saying that we go back to that because that was a completely inadequate administrative infrastructure for administering the water system? So it's very deficient, the proposals that are being made by the people who are opposing this, because they're not telling us how we can guarantee the right to water, which is the right that they're claiming to be marching in favour of. I think there's a contradiction in their position, because they're not showing, in fact, they're undermining our right to water rather than guaranteeing our right to water. But the real issue hasn't to do with water at all, it seems to me. It has to do with austerity. And my fear is that by focusing on water, we're misjudging the issue. The issue has to do with the nature of the way in which our economic and financial and political elite led us into this crisis, and how we're going to fashion a new politics, a new state, a new infrastructure, indeed, as Dahi said, a new taxation system. But none of that is in the debate. We're debating the wrong issue, in other words.
Sure, yeah, I understand this, and it's really difficult to, in fact, it's impossible to pull apart this water crisis from austerity measures. But I do want to understand what it is that's maybe broken in the water system, because regardless of austerity, surely your water system has to be repaired, right, Andrew?
Yes, and no one is saying otherwise. I mean, that our water system is of complete importance, but that is not the reason that Irish Water has been created. Irish Water has not been created to help our water system. It has been created to bail out the bondholders again. This is part of the banking crisis debt management system. It is, and there's a view here, a long view of privatization of our very own our water, so that they will steal it from us and sell it back to us and sell it on throughout the world. That is the long view here, and we can see that long view, and we're not going to stand for it. I
think there's no basis for either of those claims. Those claims are completely misleading. Water charges are part of the bailout package. That's correct. The water charges should have been introduced decades ago, like they have been in other European countries, to give us a modern water system, number one. So we were forced into something that our own politicians haven't the courage to do by Europe. And they're part of a modern taxation system. And that's what we're being forced to adopt. And it would be far better that instead of resisting them, we'd have a debate about developing a modern taxation system. And this red herring about privatization, there is absolutely no basis for this. And it's ridiculous to have a campaign about...
They make no sense as they stand. As they currently stand, capped for 4 years, they will not even cover their own running costs. They make absolutely no sense from an economic standpoint. It is obviously the long view here to get us on the system, metered. Why are they even putting in meters still when they are not going to use the meters? They're capped, with capped payments.
The reason they're not using
the meters is gentlemen, just give me a little bit of a space here, just because we're trying to keep up with you internationally. Why are the meters being put in anyway?
Because we want to pay for the water. We want to estimate what usage of water is.
Okay.
Pay according to that. But the government have caved in to this campaign and have introduced now a flat charge for the next few years.
And will your tax bill
water meters aren't being used because of the campaign.
Gentlemen, and will your tax bill
go... part of the original plan.
All right, so the government is listening to the people protesting. So will the tax bill go down because you're now paying for water?
No, you see, the
No.
thing here is
No.
that there's no debate about progressive taxation because this government is hell-bent on preserving a tax system that's not producing enough money to run the state. Sinn Féin have continuously made proposals around tax reform, as recently as our pre-budget submission that we made to the state in the debate around the forthcoming budget year. We have indicated where we'd bring in tax reform that would be able to fund local government, fund water and fund the state without heaping austerity and cuts upon ordinary people.
Right.
We have said a 48% taxation on earnings over 100,000. We've also promoted a wealth tax. So this is part of the debate, but this government would rather maintain an old-fashioned tax regime that punishes low-income people and then put stealth tax and charges on households. We all know, every international survey has indicated stealth taxes and charges impact on low-income families. And the reason why people, I think this is an important point.
Sure, I want to get the community in because they also want to talk to you as well, Dorothy. So finish up very quickly so we can get the community in.
What I'd say that the people feel they can win this battle. Previous battles of austerity, they simply cut our wages, cut our income, put taxes on our houses and our homes. We couldn't beat them. There's a sense of victory, and that propels people and is a momentum in itself.
Interesting. All right, Omar.
So the fundamental question appears to be whether the government is under obligation to provide water to citizens as a general good, and we have people disagreeing about that on Facebook. Didi says, considering we're mainly made up of water, then of course it is under that obligation. I will never pay for tap water, stand up for basic rights. On the other hand, you have Maurice here who says, why not throw in free electricity and gas while we're at it and drive the country back into bankruptcy? Michelle, I want to bring you in here. Do you think this is a fair comparison?
Yes.
Is water just another utility that people should be paying for regardless, or is there something special about water that makes it such a basic general good that should be provided to all regardless of whether they can pay or not?
Well, I think in fairness there are a lot of simplistic arguments made. There are people already in our country who are paying for water. I'm from a rural constituency, and while I grew up in a town myself, my grandmother, my cousins, many people I went to school with, they either had to drill a well or they had to come together under what is called a group water scheme and pay for pipes with some government assistance to put them in the ground, but they pay for water since then. And so already there are people paying for water. We know that businesses pay for water. The regime that has been in existence to date, yes, of course, taxpayers' money has been going towards that, but we are in a situation where we're in a very dire straits in relation to our drinking water and our wastewater treatment. We have 50% of water going into the ground. That's water that's treated. And just to clarify, that the meters serve a couple of functions, and one of them is if water is leaking under the ground, you can't identify where the leak is unless you have a meter. So metering is part and parcel of that. The metering also, and there's a commitment by government that, say in the case of an individual and they don't use their allowance of water that they're given, they can actually claim a rebate. So that would be some encouragement towards water conservation. So the installation of meters is hand in hand with water conservation. That's the idea of it. Now at the moment in a county near my own, County Roscommon, there are about 22,000 houses on boil water notices. So that means that even though they receive water through the taps, they can't actually drink their water, and there's a plan now on foot of Irish Water to actually fix that. On the other side, which to me is actually of even greater concern, we have a big problem with wastewater treatment and sewage treatment, such that 44 urban conurbations, town villages in our country are actually discharging raw sewage into coastline water areas and into our rivers and lakes. And if you look at a recent report by the EPA where they looked at urban wastewater treatment, they are saying that there is the equivalent of 400,000 individuals who do not receive, in terms of the households involved, who have either inadequate or none in terms of wastewater treatment, which is wastewater and sewage treatment. Clearly there's a massive problem. The idea of Irish Water is this. Now, you know, there's, as I said, there's a lot of general things thrown out, and without a doubt the government is in an awkward situation having to bring this in, but there's a problem that cannot be ignored. If you're being responsible, which is what you're required to be do in government, you can't ignore it. We have to fix the system that's there. We had 34 local authorities. Yes, they were getting money from central funds. They were also getting money from businesses to operate, to treat water and then to invest in infrastructure. It has been very haphazard. It has been very much emergency response. Clearly, from some of what I've described to you there, the system badly needs to be upgraded from the point of view of human beings consuming water, us having a safe, and secure and adequate water supply, from an environmental point of view and from a business point of view. So I would agree with the discussion at the outset that a lot of the issues pertaining to water are not getting a fair discussion because, yes, I would agree, people have been very, very stretched over the past number of years because of the economic climate that we have had and the difficult and unpopular decisions that government have had to take that no politician in their right mind would ever want to take if they wanted to be popular. But clearly something more was required of us. The country was in a dire position, and economically we are in a better position than we were when this government took over.
Michelle, let me just share this conversation just a little bit more. As you were talking, I showed a page from the Irish Times. Nearly 1/3 of secondary sewage treatment plants in Ireland failed to meet EU standards, according to the Environmental Protection Agency. You detailed a whole load of issues right there that really do need to be addressed. Omar, what is our community saying about these issues?
You know, we have people who are actually also disputing. At the end of the day, people agree that something has to be fixed, but of course the question is who the burden should fall on. We have Paula who tweeted in saying, after a weekend of flushing 3 times a day only and washing dishes only once a day, I realized I could not spend the rest of my life living like this. And we have Paula, she went on actually to say, abolishing water charges is what is needed, progressive taxation through ability, not commodification of natural resources. These are human, not consumer rights. So Potter, I want to throw this to you. What do you think about the idea that the burden should be shifted on people who are more able to pay, so that as opposed to making it based on water usage, so this way people who with less financial ability are not the ones who are forced to use less water, but people who can pay more are the ones who are sharing more of that burden?
Well, this is the overall issue of our taxation system as a whole, which I agree with Dahi in saying that we haven't sufficiently addressed this, but this is a bigger issue than just payment for water. So we need to develop a modern taxation system that shifts the burden much more towards, particularly it seems to me, towards the big sector of our economy that gets off extremely lightly, and that has not just an economic but a real moral responsibility to pay a lot more, which are the huge corporations, the multinational companies, many of them headquartered in the US, which pay minimal taxes here and yet benefit hugely and in other words make huge profits from coming here. So, you know, all our political parties, including Sinn Féin, fail to grasp that nettle. And that's the bigger issue. I mean, in terms of water, I think Michelle is correct in saying that we need a system which has built-in incentives to people to save water. And simply paying for it out of general taxation, which is a system that's completely failed, and Michelle showed us the extent to which it has failed, is a return to a failed system. I don't see how the people who are proposing this can see that this guarantees a right to water. It's the very opposite. It undermines all our right to water.
Michelle, what did you want to add?
Well, all I wanted to say was, while at the outset Peadar was agreeing with Dahi there in relation to looking at a more progressive taxation system, I think you know, a lot of words are bandied about and they nearly become cliches, because in fact what Peadar was suggesting, which I'm assuming is that we'd look at our corporation tax, which is at 12.5%. The Sinn Féin position, of which Dahi is a member of that political party, is that it would remain. The other issue is that we did have issues in relation to the introduction of a property tax, which generally is also viewed as a progressive tax measure, and that it is the area to levy taxes as opposed to tax on direct employment, which is seen to be more anti-job and anti-investment. So, you know, things are bandied about, I would say, and I'm not referring to Peadar, in a populist sort of way, without really getting down to the nitty-gritty. For example, a wealth tax that Dahi mentioned there, when you actually examine that, what Sinn Féin is talking about, taxing farmers for land where it's not productive, and I mean, it's not farmers' fault that their land's not productive.
Michelle, forgive me for asking this, but I'm just, you don't need to be
spending.
Right, Michelle, you don't need to be a genius to work out that this conversation is probably nothing to do with water. It's all to do with how Ireland is managing its finances. Let me just bring in Andrew here. Andrew, you did a poem that went online that was phenomenal. It went really viral. Can you tell us about that poem and why do you think you got so much response from the Irish population?
Well, you see, I think it resonated because it's exactly the voice that isn't being heard in this debate right now.
Yeah.
It's the people who literally cannot pay for this extra austerity tax, which is what it is. It's the people at the coalface of 6 years of austerity who, in a country that has been brought to its knees by austerity, suicide rates up 13% since the start of the economic crisis, our health service in free fall. I have a friend who has waited 8 years to get a lump on her breast checked, just to get a mammogram. We have people dying in our emergency rooms. We have homelessness at an all-time high, people dying on the streets. Poverty, we have 1 in 10 kids in poverty. Nurses and teachers using food banks. Our emigration, 250 a day, leaving this country. Unemployment still at 10%, even though those hundreds of thousands have left. Our mortgage crisis, 100,000 people in default and 50,000 in repossession proceedings. And you're talking about how we do this progressive tax system. There's things happening right now that need to be addressed. There are people dying because of this austerity. And why? Because we have bailed out the bankers. And that is what people still are, this government is still tone deaf to, and the corruption involved in the setting up of this Irish water. We want our water to be good. We want it to be well managed. That is our sincere wish and dream, that the money that we spend in taxation towards administering and caring for our water should be used to administrate and care for our water. This is what we want. We want that the people who we pay handsomely to administrate and care for our water should actually administrate and care for our water with some wit and capability.
Can I just say that really the test for Irish Water will be the rollout of the infrastructural projects, water and sewage that we badly need. Now, there's already a 3-year capital investment programme in place, and it's going to cost about €1.7 billion. Now, I can say from a rural county that I could give you textbook cases of how the old system was not working. We have raw sewage going into special areas of conservation. We have raw sewage going into a designated shellfish area. It is only a matter of time before we're prosecuted and fined for this. We have problems with leaking pipes. I have people actually in an area not too far from where I live who will say to me, please, can we get the water fixed? We don't mind paying for water. Now this is the other side of it, that there are serious problems. Now the test is, and there's a 3-year plan there. Now I have seen, in relation to my own county, schemes and projects there, whether it's Belmullet or Foxford or Charlestown, Killala, I could go on, that are now on the list. Some are actually beginning the preliminary work, where they are actually going to be done, and they have been on a list. I was on the county council before this. They've been on a list for years, and
Michelle,
I know exactly
finish
why
up
they
your
weren't done for
sentence,
years,
because we're right at the end of the show.
The council didn't have the money to do. But these are now going to be done. So that is result. That is the test for Irish Water.
Okay.
The other issues,
Michelle, I'm going to take that other issue to the post show, Michelle, because we're literally right at the end of the show. This debate has only just got started. It's been going on in Ireland for a long time. So we're going to take Michelle and Potter and Dorothy and Andrew or to our post show at stream.aljazeera.com. If you want to be part of this conversation, #AJStream. Omar, tell us about the community and the reaction to this conversation so far.
We have a reaction that is critical of the government. You have Nissa here who tweeted in saying the failure of the Irish government to see the anger about the water charges before the protest is politically lethal and irreversible.
All right, okay, so more in just a moment at stream.aljazeera.com. Okay, so let me tell you about our next AJ Stream, Doctors and Torture. The US Senate's so-called torture report says that medical professionals help the CIA develop harsh interrogation methods. But should doctors even have a role in counter-terrorism? Let us know what you think. Omar will be waiting for your response at #AJStream. Until then, we will see you online. Thanks for watching. Welcome back to the Post Show. We've been discussing Ireland's decision to start charging residents for water usage. Dorothy, if when the water charges come, are you going to pay them? Are you going to pay for your water meter?
Well, first of all, I think it's worth noting that Michelle's argument against water charges just further underline my argument against them, because she's clearly indicated that they've mismanaged our resources. Consecutive governments have mismanaged investment. That's our money, that's the public's money, and now they've realised that the water system is below standard, and they're punishing ordinary households for simply drinking water, showering and flushing the toilet. I think what we really do need is a proper, healthy, broad discussion on taxation, how we fund our essential services. The government can't be on the run all the time and say we can't discuss taxation. And I agree, we do agree with the government around corporation tax, but we want the corporation.
All right, so Dorothy, let me just slow you down a second, because I'm just trying to watch this as an international. Dorothy, let me just slow you down a second, because you are way ahead on this conversation than we are internationally. So, punishing ordinary citizens for using water. Is not the water system in Ireland due for an upgrade anyway?
Absolutely. We've argued that for years.
Right.
Consecutive governments, the people we voted in on our behalf, have continued to mismanage our resources to the extent where billions and billions of taxpayers' money, myself, every man, woman and child, will pay billions of euros to bail out banks that were toxic. That's not our responsibility. We want to provide essential services, healthcare, housing, education, clean water to our citizens right across the state, north, south, east and west. That can only be done with a proper capital infrastructure. And I certainly won't be paying the water charges, not because I can't afford it, but in solidarity with those who can't afford to pay it.
Sure.
That's what I'm going to do. And but I don't have every confidence that this government are punch drunk, they're on the ropes, they have one more punch and they'll be out of the ring on this issue.
So, speaking of which, I mean, this idea that this is bigger than just the water issue, we have people who are tweeting in about this also agreeing. Ray says there is, of course, a political dimension here. The more widespread feeling that this water issue is just a metaphor for the government's lack of sensitivity. And then we have this video comment from Kieran. Take a listen to this.
For many people, it just seems to be the final straw. After 6 years of austerity, people are just tired of paying off for the crimes of a small elite, for bankers and bondholders, and that's why we've seen so many demonstrations now, whereas we didn't when the Troika came to town or the bankers were originally bailed out.
Andrew, if this is just the metaphoric issue, suppose theoretically the government does cave on the issue of water, does that mean the end of the protests, or are these going to continue for the other issues that people are upset about?
Oh, no. This won't be the end of the protests. The protesters will not be happy until this corrupt, ignorant and arrogant government is gone for good. Yeah, we also want the water charges gone too, but no, it has to be. And I will not be paying this charge, and there are many like me. The boycott will be huge. This charge will fall apart due to non-payment and civil disobedience. I can promise you that right now. And it is time that this government woke up and listened to that fact, because they're going to get a very rude awakening. That this government will fall, Irish water will fall, and Ireland will rise. I can tell you that right now.
See, Professor, you said much early on in our conversation that this wasn't the issue to choose. What would be the issue to choose over, going to battle with your current administration over?
Yeah, the paradox is, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Dahi and Andrew were saying, but the paradox is that they have chosen an issue, and the people that are going to be hurt by this issue are particularly the most vulnerable sectors of our own population. I mean, the international bankers and the bondholders aren't going to be in the slightest bit touched by this. And that's what I fear about this, that they've chosen completely the wrong issue, and they have failed to mobilise people about the real issues, and those real issues are the imposition of austerity in order to bail out a banking system that failed us drastically, backed up by a regulatory system that failed us drastically. These are the issues that we should be debating. And yet again, we picked an issue where the poorest among us, the most vulnerable, are going to suffer as a result. The so-called left have chosen this issue, and I think it's a great failing. It's a great failing of Irish politics.
But Pater, I think you'd have to agree that the hundreds of thousands of people that have been mobilised in recent months in unprecedented numbers. We had 107 protests with nearly 160,000 people on them in November the 1st. October the 11th, over 100,000 people in Dublin. Midwinter, last Wednesday evening up to anything between 60, 70, 80,000 people outside the Dáil, our parliament. The people have chosen this issue because the people feel they can win. And you're right, we've had 6 years of austerity. Sinn Féin have continually proposed alternatives, alternative taxation, housing, healthcare, education policies that have been simply rebuked by the consecutive governments. And now the water issue has galvanised people. And I would also dispute that the left, which were part of this coalition in Right to Water, which is unions, communities and the left parties, is working very, very well together. And I would say hopefully it's about to giving birth to a new society, a new community, a new way of doing stuff, a new politics. And I would say that the coalition that we have formed around the Right to Water campaign has been galvanised right into the future. And I think the forthcoming election will give a real left-right politics in Ireland. I would say that the left will do exceptionally well. And I think the relationships that we have been working on in the Right to Water will actually strengthen the relationships with creating a left-of-centre progressive government after the next general election that will deal with water, healthcare, housing, taxation, the banks, all the issues that concern people. But right now, there's 100,000 people, hundreds of thousands of people on the streets around water. It would be foolish and arrogant of me to ignore that. But we are using it to galvanise people to create an alternative, a new government after the next general election. I think this government is tired, it's arrogant, it's removed from reality.
Daithí, you made that point several times over. Let's go to Omar.
One of the things that came up over and over in our online community is the issue of privatization. We have Pashna Kaur here who tweeted in saying the charge is already in place through the general taxation. There's poor planning that can be improved. However, privatization is the real agenda. And we have Lamfada here who also tweeted in saying, I'm more concerned with potential privatization of Irish water. Drinking water should not be a private commodity. Michelle, for the people who see this as the ultimate agenda, what do you say to them?
Sorry, Omar.
The issue of people who basically see privatization as really being the underlying cause for all of this.
I've heard this concern expressed. There is absolutely no agenda to privatise Irish water. In fact, legislation has been amended to provide that if any government into the future decided they want to go down that route, that they would have to put a referendum to the people. So the people would vote on that matter. So that's a red herring. I think what we actually have going on here is, I mean, it's so easy to bang the table here. I would agree. People are stretched and they're tired, and the way our constituencies operate is like we're very much on the ground. I'm on the ground. I hold clinics. Other than when I'm in Dublin, I've advice clinics. So the ordinary citizen comes in off the street, and by God, do they come in? I deal with people. I go around my constituency, and I would have, I believe, a picture of where people are at, and they are stretched and they are under pressure. Without a doubt, a lot of the things I heard Andrew describe in our society would be correct, but I think it's a lot more complex than that. I think we've come from an unsustainable high, which was the Celtic Tiger, where there was no end to what we'd spend and when we might pay for it and all the rest. And I know the banks come into that and they're part in it. But interestingly enough, at the moment, as we're borrowing, as we're getting our economy and our debt under control, we're borrowing 7 billion a year, and about 20% of that goes towards repaying bank debt. The rest is towards debt we have incurred from overspending on public services and other financial commitments given by a previous government, which actually has put us into debt. And now we've got a shortfall because we've unemployment and so on. That means we have to make it up. So we're borrowing for this. So the banking picture is not the entire picture. There's a debt problem there because of spending, because the Exchequer hasn't been taking in enough to meet it. Thankfully, that is correcting. And an honest account of the way the country is at, despite problems which must be addressed, is yes, there is concern, there is fear. There was fear about the price of water. That has been clearly addressed, and I would stand four square over the idea that it has to be pitched at an affordable level.
Let me just ask you this, because we're hurtling towards the end of this part of the show as well, and I hate to wrap you up without finishing a thought.
Yes.
Was the administration caught by surprise by how upset people would be about having to pay for water and also being taxed for it? Was that a surprise?
I think in relation to the issue itself, I would say possibly, but in terms of the cumulative effect, as has been described, of all the harsh realities and financial cuts that people have had to deal with, it's not really a surprise, and it goes back to the discussion at the beginning. But can I just say on this note, because an awful lot of this has, and we're speaking internationally here. Yeah. Yes, there are.
I've got 2 minutes, Michelle. Then everybody just goes to black. So just finish your sentence.
People who see that the economy is in a better place. They want to invest. They want to grow jobs. Jobs are being created. We see since this government took over, we've gone from losing a quarter of a million jobs in 3 years up to the last government to now recreating 80,000 jobs. Jobs are being announced. That's the way the economy will lift. That's the way people will be able to provide for themselves and their families.
Michelle Maheran, I have 90 seconds left to say goodbye and thank you. Michelle, finish your sentence.
We have to have hope. We have to have hope for our country.
Ending on a hopeful note, we have Professor Kirby, we have Dorothy Doolan, we have Andrew Galvin. We have so much more to talk about. We literally do not have the time. I do not want to fade to black so quickly. Thank you, guests, very much indeed. Omar?
We have a final thought from community about distrust in the government's ability to reform the system. You have James Winner here who tweeted in saying, stop paying extortionate fees to consultants. The government wastes more money than the system wastes water.
All right, let me move ahead to our next show. And the US Senate's so-called torture report says that medical professionals help the CIA develop harsh interrogation methods. But should doctors even have a role in counter-terrorism efforts? Do you have a thought about that? #AJStream. You can tweet Omar ahead of the next show. Until then, I'll see you online.